Hello, my name is Rain and welcome to my channel where I discuss fantasy Formula 1. Today I'm going to discuss what the best teams are for the Singapore Grand Prix and going forward, what teams we should be building. I'm going to discuss some other points though as well, and I thought we'd just jump right into it because why not? It has been revealed that after Red Bull and Ferrari filed a complaint, McLaren has to change its rear wing because I don't know if you've seen the outroar of it online, a tiny little flap where air could get through as it was flexing. The wing complied with the still tests, but apparently still flexed too much, and they now have to change it. Now this is translated from German. It's a German article. It's still so new that this has dropped. It dropped within the last hour. That I haven't found a good English article about it yet. But what's important about this is that it actually does not affect us right now as F1 fantasy managers. Why? Well, because they're not changing the entire wing. They're not scrapping it. All they have to do is make the flap stiffer in the appropriate places, that it maintains its position and shape regardless of the speed. It will have no effect on the next 3 races in Singapore, Austin, and Mexico, because all the teams are using wings with more downforce that are constructed completely differently. So all of this news, I got some questions about it online, so I thought I'd talk about it. We don't have to worry about McLaren having to throw away their entire wing in the middle of a weekend, so this should not affect their performance in Singapore. But I still have a sneaky suspicion that we might want to focus our attention on someone else. And that someone else is Charles Leclerc and Ferrari. Now, I think, granted, we've only seen free practice 1, and I haven't even seen the full data about it. So you have to come back to this channel tomorrow for the deadline stream, 2 hours before the qualifying starts, 2 hours before the deadline, and then we'll actually look at more data that's been processed. But Ferrari look pretty fast, and they were very, very fast here last year. They were very, very fast in Monaco, and this race is pretty much as close to like Monaco and Hungary as you can get. It's a street circuit just like Monaco. It's very, very close in setup as Hungary, but in Hungary, McLaren were the fastest. So we still don't know, but I think it's very, very clear as of right now that Ferrari and McLaren are going to be the 2 best teams, and those are the teams you want, especially for your constructors, and then some makeup of their drivers as your 2 other premium drivers. If you don't remember what my team looked like, this is it right now. And what I can do with this team is extremely, extremely flexible. Right now, I'm not looking to get anything else but the Ferrari and the McLaren assets for my assets that are actually going to pick up the points. I still have McLaren and Ferrari as my constructors. I'm super, super happy about that. As for my drivers, I don't think I'm getting rid of Lando. I still think if Lando is up there in terms of qualifying, he should be favored by the team. I don't know if they will let him pass Oscar if Oscar's 5 seconds ahead of him, but I do think that if Lando is pushing, Oscar's ahead, they will tell Lando is in DRS in such a dangerous track as Singapore. I do suspect that we will see maybe some team orders come out of McLaren for the first time in a long time. So because of that, I'm very likely to keep Norris. And I mean, Charles Leclerc has just been on fire for Ferrari. I know Sainz won here last year and he was 3rd fastest in FP1 as well. But Charles Leclerc just looks so unbelievably fast. The one advantage that Sainz has over Leclerc is his price, right? If you can't afford a team like mine, if your budget is worse, going for like Norris plus Sainz is perfectly fine. And Sainz is still a B tier asset, so Sainz will increase more in price. Likely to have a 0.3 million increase, perhaps a 1 million increase if you can, be P1, P2, driver of the day, fastest lap territory. So Carlos Sainz definitely an option for those of you looking to save some on the budget, but I'm very likely to just go for Charles Leclerc. And in this case, I'm also quite likely to use my second sort of free transfer. I still want to save 1 transfer for Kota. I talked about that in my transfer plans video earlier this week, that since it's going to be a 3-week break between Singapore and Kota, saving a transfer could be really, really powerful, especially since it's looking like Red Bull are bringing upgrades to Kota, and we might want to look to get their assets in at that point. This would very likely just be one more move, and that is to get Valtteri Bottas over Zhou Guanyu. I still think Valtteri Bottas is a better option than over Zhou Guanyu in terms of points. It's just that Zhou Guanyu was better in Baku. But now, like, Valtteri Bottas still, it appears that Valtteri Bottas is the one that has a chance of getting that second Sauber seat for next year if they don't go for a Bortoleto or a Colapinto or a Pourchaire. So Bottas definitely has something to drive for. So he really needs to prove himself in the next few races before Sauber make their decision. And now after Azerbaijan, Bottas is actually cheaper than Zhou Guanyu. He's 7.2 where Zhou is 7.3, so I also save $1 million in the bank. This team is perfectly set up right here as it is for how I feel like the field is looking like. It's looking to be a McLaren Ferrari sort of sweep here. And Williams look to be the best of the rest. Maybe, you know, Fernando Alonso in the Aston Martin, but that's a different price point entirely. So in terms of the C-tier assets, I wouldn't imagine picking anyone but Williams currently. So for that reason, I feel like this team is pretty much perfect. Yes, you know, if I had $3 more million in the bank, which I would get with a Carlos Sainz, the Valtteri Bottas here could be a Nico Hülkenberg. But I do think that Charles Leclerc is still, he's just been on fire this entire year, by the way. He's had a very, very quiet year, but a very, very good year, if that makes sense, right? I feel like Charles Leclerc is really going under the radar. There's a lot of talk of, you know, Red Bull's downfall, about Oscar Piastri being fantastic, about Lando Norris's mistakes, but McLaren being really, really fast. Charles Leclerc has, I don't think he's lost a position on lap 1, unless like he DNF'd or something like that. He's had a crazy good season and is not being talked about enough. He's already won twice and he could definitely win in Singapore. An important quote from Charles Leclerc after the Azerbaijan Grand Prix was that he struggled to overtake Piastri again because the McLaren was faster on the straights, but that he and Ferrari were faster in the corners. And I see that and I look at Singapore and I only see corners. So if Charles Leclerc can put it on pole in Singapore, like Sainz did last year, by the way, I do think Charles Leclerc can go and win it if the strategy is good for Ferrari, which you have to give it to Ferrari. The strategy this year has been mostly flawless. So I really, really like the setup of this team. And I think these are just the two moves I'm going to make. It sets up well for final fix. So I could definitely final fix on a team like this. But I'm actually more likely to use a different chip, and that's what we're going to talk about next. So we're approaching the end of the season, which means that you have to start planning and you have to start using your chips. And I have 3 chips available. I've used the no negative, I've used the limitless, I've used the wildcard. All good. Final fix, I've talked about that, well, in my transfer plans video and a lot over the Azerbaijan weekend. The final fix, when an opportunity arises, yes, I will be there to use the final fix. But unless it's like 100% guarantee, I think I'm just going to push it forward, if that makes sense. Not 100%, but like 85-90% certainty that playing the final fix is the correct decision. And it just hasn't been that this year at all for me. There's been 2 moments where I've considered it, and both times it's been a 50-50, 60-40 split. And I've ended up not using it, and both times I've not used it, it's actually been correct. So I think there's something to it that, you know, unless it is an 80-20 split in terms of like favorability for the final fix, I don't think you should use it. Another thing is, like, I've had people ask me, well, what if you don't use it now? If you didn't use it last week, when will you ever use it? The answer is I don't know. But even if I don't end up using it until the last race of the season, there's always something you can do with the final fix. The final fix doesn't have to be the most optimal chip of all time. And if I get to the final race of the season with the final fix still there, I will be perfectly fine just switching out a C-tier asset I think will score a slight few more points in the race, or switch my second B-tier asset. Say I have, you know, Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri, Norris starts on pole, Piastri starts 5th, Leclerc starts 2nd, I can just switch Piastri to Leclerc. Just one of those small switches that gives me a couple of extra points sprinkled in there. I feel like, you know, moves like that is what I can do in the final race of the season with the final fix if I haven't used it yet, right? So I'm personally not worried about the final fix. I'm using it if an opportunity arises, or I'm using it in the final race of the season. The extra DRS is obviously going to be used in a sprint weekend. Which one, I don't know yet. Kota, maybe, but I think I'll wait and see on Kota. If Red Bull look good, I might want to make sure that my team is perfectly structured for the extra DRS. Maybe there's a way I could fit in like Oscar Piastri plus Max Verstappen. I haven't looked into it yet, but the extra DRS will be used in either Kota or Brazil. I'm probably using it in Brazil, but again, not confirmed. We'll have to wait and see. But it's definitely being used in one of the 3 sprint races. And then we get to the Autopilot. And the Autopilot is very, very interesting. It's probably the weakest chip of the 6 that we have available, just for the fact that most of the time in teams such as ours, unless you have a crazy triple premium driver team, the Autopilot has a 50% chance of just being useless, right? There's no way where Albon, Colapinto, or Shogun Yu outscores Norris and Piastri. You know, there would have to be a double DNF, and in that case, I'm in bigger trouble than just with the Autopilot. I'm in such big trouble that the Autopilot won't fix that. So the Autopilot is not that strong because, you know, if I look at my 2 drivers, ignore my second team over here, but if you look at my 2 drivers, have Norris, Piastri, like, the difference between them in points is not that great from any given weekend to the other. And yes, I can place it on the wrong driver. And if I do place it on the wrong driver, you know, I make an extra 20 points maybe. But there's a 50% chance that I already place it on the correct driver, which means the Autopilot chip would end up being useless. That being said, I've argued before that, you know, using an Autopilot in a sprint weekend is always good because, again, higher likelihood of DNFs, and DNFs is what really pushes an asset's, you know, total score down, which means that you can actually get a bigger swing on the Autopilot. You know, say Lando Norris DNFs in the sprint race but wins in the race, you know, he still gets minus 25 for not finishing the sprint, or it's minus 20, I can't even remember, something like that. Minus 20 probably. He gets minus 20 for not finishing the sprint, DNFing in the sprint. Piastri gets second both times, for example. You know, Piastri would get more points just because of that negative, even though Lando outscored him in the race. Things of that nature. So the Autopilot is really good in sprint weekends, yes, but I would make a case to maybe use the Autopilot here in Singapore, because Singapore street circuit is probably the last really dangerous circuit left on the map. I've said previously that Autopilot was likely to go in something like Brazil because it could rain there, which could lead to DNFs, but Brazil is a pretty safe circuit overall when it doesn't rain, and it's not even guaranteed that it will rain. So I'm increasingly leaning towards actually using the Autopilot here in Singapore. One, because I'm probably going to be running Lando Norris and Charles Leclerc. That's 2 drivers from 2 different teams. And if it turns out that one team is significantly faster than the other, that could end up being a bigger swing, right? A bigger difference. Another thing is that Lando Norris has not been perfect recently, so he could absolutely smash it like he did in Zandvoort, but he could also have a stinker like he did in Azerbaijan and qualify P17. He could also, you know, fall back on lap 1, and, you know, I'm just not feeling super safe with Norris yet, even though I do still think he's the highest ceiling asset in the game. He definitely has a lower floor than someone like Charles Leclerc does. So using the Autopilot to sort of hedge my bet between McLaren and Ferrari for a weekend where I don't know who's going to come out on top, right? Ferrari was best at Singapore last year. This race is, you know, kind of like Monaco, tight, you know, street circuit. Ferrari was really good at Monaco this year, but in terms of actually, you know, how the lap is structured and how the track is structured, it's actually closest in terms of, you know, speed, corners, and speed through corners, things like that. It's actually closest to Hungary, and McLaren were really good in Hungary. So I don't know who's going to be the fastest of McLaren and Ferrari, but I do think it's going to be either Lando Norris or Charles Leclerc winning, depending on which team is fastest. So therefore, I think the Autopilot could be really good here, and it also protects me against those freak DNFs like we saw last year. I mean, there were multiple crashes, right? Lance Stroll crashed in qualifying, totally wrecked his car and didn't even race on the Sunday. And then we also had George Russell crashing on the final lap, chasing just a slight touch to the wall. So I think right now I'm quite likely to actually use the Autopilot here just to protect against DNFs from one of my 2 premium drivers. Let me know down below if you think that's crazy, or if you think I should save it for one of the sprint weekends, or if you're also considering Autopilot or no negative. I will briefly mention on the no negative because I know a lot of you are sitting with the no negative still. The no negative, I still think, despite Singapore being a dangerous track, I think the no negative is best in a sprint weekend, because what the autopilot does, it doesn't protect you from DNFs, it protects you from DNFs on one of your two premium drivers. The no negative protects you from DNFs across all your drivers, which means that in that case, when you're having two races, sprint race plus feature race, you really should use the no negative in a sprint. So I think no negative is probably best in Brazil if you still have it, but again, you should prioritize using the 3x in one of those races if your team lines up well for it. Now let's quickly go over and talk about some C tier assets, as well as the inactive drivers, right? If you have Oliver Bearman, you obviously sell. If you have Logan Sargent, you obviously sell. We saw last week that even, inactive drivers actually get a price reduction, which I did not expect at all. So that is very, very, very interesting and very, very terrible for those of you holding inactive assets. Those of you with Oliver Bearman, I know it's not a lot, but if you have Oliver Bearman, you have to sell. He's now inactive. And I actually saw some good news for once. I found someone who actually had Oliver Bearman in his team. He lost the value from Oliver Bearman decreasing 1.7 million, but F1 gave that value back into his cost cap. So I do not know what happened here, but it was like I feared, that you actually lost 1.7 million budget wise, but everyone with Oliver Bearman has been given it back. So all good. Very, very unfortunate for those people, especially if you made transfers, before Oliver Bearman was counted as inactive, and this was fixed. But it has been fixed now. I think what happened was that they were supposed to have Oliver Bearman as an asset at Kevin Magnussen's price, because Kevin Magnussen was 12.8, and then Bearman increased by 0.5 million to 13.3. But it displayed him like his Ferrari value, which was 15 million from back in Saudi. So that's what happened to Oliver Bearman, but now he is actually a driver in the game that's inactive, which means he's going to decrease by 0.2 million every race. So if Oliver Bearman jumps in because someone gets injured, or Magnussen gets another 12 penalty points later on in the season, Oliver Bearman should be cheaper than 13.3 million, depending on how many races he's been inactive for. So he's just gonna tick along, go down 0.2 every single race. And then a few of you still have Logan Sargent. Now it's time to get rid. I know some people used no negative last weekend to sort of use the Logan Sargent loophole for another race. Well, you've used no negative and now you can't use it anymore. You have to sell. And in terms of selling, Franco Colapinto, if you don't have it, is the obvious choice, but if not, then it has to be Valtteri Bottas at 7.2 million. And affording that could be quite difficult unless you have easy downgrades in like an Oscar Piastri to a Carlos Sainz, for example, like I spoke of earlier. Kevin Magnussen is back in the game at 12.6 million without any penalty points, so he can do whatever he wants. Now, I don't think we should be rushing to get K-Mag back in there. I know he's been the most consistent asset over the course of the year. C-tier asset, that is. But at 12.6 million, he's quite difficult to afford and slot in there. And considering how good Williams look right now, I would just go for the Williams assets and kind of ignore K-Mag. I would probably go Williams, Hulkenberg, and focus on having, those two now A-tier premium assets, as well as McLaren plus Ferrari. So if you're sitting there with a Mercedes or a George Russell because you're running K-Mag, I don't think that's worth it. I think it's better to downgrade to Albon, Colapinto, Shogun Yu, and run a setup like I am. Now I know that's biased because that's what my team looks like, but I truly think that is the best way to play the game right now. And I wouldn't be playing it if I didn't think it was the best way. So I do think that K-Mag is not an option unless you're super rich and can just slot him in here if you're 4.4 million richer than I am. So just to recap, my likely moves this weekend will be to bring Charles Leclerc in and Valtteri Bottas in for Oscar Piastri and Shogun Yu, saving a transfer for Kota, maybe using the Autopilot chip If you want to see if I actually end up using it, you gotta be here at the deadline stream tomorrow, 2 hours before the deadline, 2 hours before qualifying. Just look at the team lock deadline at the top of your F1 Fantasy homepage, and you'll see when my when my stream starts. If you have any questions, you can ask them there. We're gonna be doing team submissions, so join the Discord so you're ready for that. As always, we're gonna do my tip of the week, we're gonna do C-tier rankings, all of that good stuff, and just generally talk about what all the data that we've seen across FP1, 2, and 3. So don't miss it. Be there, deadline stream tomorrow, this channel right here. I'll see you then. Goodbye for now. Have a good Friday.